In today's episode, we are talking about gaming and fun in the learning process. To help me do that, I'm joined by Alex Cacopardo, the founder of Flourish Instruction, LLC. It's an instructional design and education consulting business that specializes in creating custom, engaging interactions through gamification. As a former teacher, Alex has unique insight into the way people learn and don't learn. As a partner of Legacy Learning Consulting, she has been instrumental in creating behavior shifting learning experiences. So today, I'm excited to pick her brain about fun in the learning process. So welcome, Alex, and thank you for being here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into this because, I think it's one of these things that, you and I have talked a lot about the education system and how it sets up learning to be boring, even though the natural learning experience is fun. Naturally, if you just leave people alone and they need to learn something, they do it through fun. So I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on the role of fun, or how does fun come into the learning process?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I think that fun in itself is this very effective tool that people just aren't using enough in the education world. And what I found is that when you leverage fun in your learning, it can, first and foremost, reduce stress from the learner that they normally feel whenever they're learning something new, because that learning something or anything or adding to the knowledge you already have can be quite the taxing process. And it can also be very motivating to complete the learning process, when you're having fun. So I think that's a very powerful, effective tool that overall decreases stress, enhances motivation, but just isn't being used enough.
That's an interesting thought. So it's something we don't talk a ton about, but as we build learning experiences, we are trying to minimize this idea of stress in the learning process. Where do you think that stress comes from?
I do think that a lot of it can come from prior experiences, especially, that a lot of traditional learning can have timers, and adding a timer can be a fun element if it's done correctly, and there are other fun elements to it too. But I think there's also a fear that a lot of people have of making mistakes and being wrong. And you and I as educators, we both know that there's nothing wrong with making mistakes and being wrong, because it's just a part of the learning process. But putting yourself out there and learning something new is something that's very vulnerable. So I think that can increase their stress when trying to learn. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like this idea of stress and learning is something we should do a whole podcast on, because it is it's an interesting topic that we haven't talked much about, and it is like inherently we are trying to minimize that. And that's actually, I think you just hit on the reason. Gaming and gamification, I put those in quotes, and we could talk a little bit about the difference between those later. But I have certainly had clients ask me, hey, can you make a game out of this? Or can you make this fun? And I always think, like, I know your paradigm and I know why you're saying, can you make this fun? But yes, of course, that's what we do. We don't make learning fun. We just tap into the natural experience of learning, which is fun. Or maybe say it better, we don't do things that make it not fun, right? So I think this idea of stress is a big part of why people, it's the driver behind making learning fun. Now, you mentioned one thing, like a timer, which can cause stress, but also cause fun. What are some of the things that you've done or seen that does make learning fun?
Absolutely. So obviously you and I both know, and many educators out there, we know that increasing engagement can be a lot of fun, and that active engagement, and then also adding those sort of fun game-like elements to the learning process can make it fun. And I would always say adding more of those active game-like elements can make it more fun, rather than just the passive ones alone, like a timer or a progress bar. Timers and progress bars are phenomenal tools. I use them a decent amount, but also adding more of those active game-like elements for something like something along the lines of, maybe you have a character that moves around on the screen and you can use your keyboard, or you can have a pocket. That's one of my personal favorites. Maybe you have these tools that you can use that you would normally use on your job. And then later you can go into your pocket and decide which tool would be the appropriate one to help with that decision making. But that, I think, is what can make it fun. Adding those like elements, the active game like elements. And then you can, of course, add in timers and a progress bar with it. But the timer alone, of course, may just increase stress.
So one thing I think it's important for us to point out here is that when we're talking about fun and learning, we're not just talking about fun with kids. We're talking about it for adults in the workplace. And so, I think I guess that's probably the next logical question is, what have you seen in the workplace when you talk about fun? Like, why? I know from my experience working with clients, kind of has a bad reputation. Like somebody higher up will ask for it because this whole thing that we're talking about, we know that it minimizes stress and increases motivation. But often leadership or somebody else will have a bad feeling toward it. Why do you think it has a bad reputation? Or have you seen it have a bad reputation? What are your thoughts on it?
Are you talking about training in general has a bad reputation, or gamification training and gaming has a bad reputation? Everything, it all has a bad reputation.
Yeah. No. Fun. The fun in learning, the gamification, gaming. Why does that have a bad reputation, or does it?
I do see that it does have a bad reputation with some companies, and then with others, they are ready for what's new. They're ready for the change, which is always a lot of fun because they always let me go crazy on the development side and create really fun, creative interactions for them. But I have felt that pushback from several companies that aren't as interested in fun and gaming. And I think it's because as time has passed, that training in itself has sort of gained this role of that training is only for compliance reasons. And that's not a fun experience. And in the past, it has worked and they were able to check off that box and their company is maybe doing just good enough and they just want to stay doing just good enough and aren't really ready for that change. So I think it really starts with changing that mindset and showing them that it doesn't have to be this cheesy game.
Yeah.
I think that's also another issue is that when they think of gaming, they think of your traditional video games, and maybe sometimes it's someone older at the company and they're thinking of their children's games, and that's not exactly what we're trying to mimic or create. Unless that's what they want, then I'd be very happy to create that. Exactly. But I think it's because you and I both experience this a lot, that it takes a while for something new to find its way in the education world, because I think it kind of gets this idea that if it's not broken, don't fix it.